The views and opinions expressed in this interview are protected by Section 2 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which affirms the freedom of conscience, thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media of communication. If you seek the official narrative on the COVID-19 pandemic, go to the Health Canada website. With that said, if you seek the repressed truth, stay tuned for our interview. Hello, Dr. Sam Dubé here once again for the Toronto Business Journal, and we're very lucky to have with us today Dr. Anne Cavoukian. Now, Dr. Cavoukian is Executive Director and creator of the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. She is also a former Information and Privacy Commissioner for Ontario, Canada, an unprecedented 3 times, that's for 3 terms. And she is also one of the top 25 women of influence, one of the top 10 women in data security and privacy, and a self-declared lover of privacy and freedom. Dr. Cavoukian, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Now, I think one of the big topics during this pandemic, because it is currently mid-July 2021, just to give a temporal context to this interview, is the idea of vaccine passports. We've seen some states writing executive orders from their governors, basically outlawing vaccine passports. This was done in Florida, I believe it was done in Texas. And we're here in Canada, you in Toronto, me in Ottawa. And can you please give us a little introduction into what the potential of these vaccine passports are, what they can do, and what some of the dangers are here?
First of all, vaccines consist of your health information. No one should have access to this other than you. Personal health information is the most sensitive data in terms of privacy. So here, vaccine passports, you're going to tell the whole world what's going on. What I object so strongly about vaccine passports is it will, because it's being demanded by so many governments around the world, and there's so much pressure on individuals to have these vaccines, is that it will create an inescapable web of geolocation tracking, because increasingly more and more places are demanding the vaccine passports in order to gain entry, not only in terms of travel, but gain entry into a football game, a soccer game, a concert, a store. I mean, it's crazy, but you're going to be expected to show this vaccine passport in order to gain entry. You will leave such a track. They're talking about it as vaccine surveillance. There'll be such a track of information, that your trail that you're leaving behind you. But apart from that, what I object to is it creates the model that people must have vaccines. You must get a vaccine. What about people who can't? There are people with allergies who cannot get a vaccine. At the beginning of the vaccines, this was made very prominent that if you have allergies requiring an EpiPen, for example, don't go near these vaccines. You don't hear that anymore. So there's a lot of people who cannot get the vaccines. And what's going to happen to them? You're going to create this class of individuals who are ostracized. It's appalling to me. We should not have anything linking what we do with various activities and things and ostracizing individuals who cannot get these vaccines. So I object to it on so many different levels. And I'm just hoping that countries around the world do not insist upon having a vaccine, but we're already seeing that happen, as I mentioned, France and others. So we'll see how this plays out.
There's a lot of places we can go from this, Dr. Cavoukian, and one of the words you used was ostracized. So, you know, I know in my social sphere, my somewhat limited social sphere now, I've heard of friends who've been ostracized from other groups because they didn't get the vaccine, and it didn't matter the reason. And so now you're talking about being ostracized at an official level, a grand social level, a socioeconomic level, a governmental level. And so we would end up potentially having this kind of 2-tier society. And this is sadly very reminiscent of the precursor to many regimes, if we look in history, correct?
It's so true, and it's completely unnecessary. If you're traveling or going somewhere, you can just show evidence of the fact that you're not COVID positive. You can get a COVID test very easily these days, and it will show immediately you don't have COVID. So away you go. You shouldn't have to have a vaccine passport because we don't know how the vaccines are going to play out. A number of jurisdictions, individuals who've been vaccinated twice, they still got COVID. Now they're talking about the booster shot. So it's all question marks. We should not be making this a requirement. And I'm just praying that this plays out in a way that diminishes, but I'm not optimistic.
So if we look at these potential vaccine passports, can you talk a little bit about the technology involved and what information might be carried? Because you already mentioned it could be everything, right?
Yeah. And my fear is, so the hope is that you will be able to just show, let's say you're at the airport, you show them on your mobile device that it says you're not COVID positive or you've had a vaccine or whatever, and they see it and they let you go. Ideally, they shouldn't retain that information. But realistically, they're going to collect it, they're going to retain it, the QR codes, etc. They're going to have this information all over. And that's what concerns me. There will be a centralized hub of who has vaccines and who doesn't, and where were they and where were they traveling and how do they, I mean, you can put this together in terms of massive surveillance with who connects with whom, and you can create a real plot. So my hope is that this will diminish.
Now, as a creator of your own organization, the Global Privacy and Security by Design company, you had 7 founding principles. And you've already alluded to some of these, like, for instance, destroying the information afterwards. So these are very strong principles. I won't read them all here now, but this is kind of like the foundation of good security without sacrificing privacy and vice versa, correct?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. When I created Privacy by Design many years ago, during my first term as Privacy Commissioner, I wanted a proactive means of protecting privacy. The existing model was regulatory compliance after the fact, after the data breach or privacy infraction, and offering correction. That's important, but I wanted a model of prevention, much like a medical model of prevention, where you're proactive, you have privacy protective measures that you can embed into the design of your operations, bake it into the code, into your design, so it's always present. It can't be forgotten or overlooked. And ideally, those measures will help you avoid most of the privacy infractions and data breaches. And this model that I created was, after about 10 years, was widely embraced. It was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. And the essence of it, and it was included just a few years ago in the new law in the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is really a big deal. But the essence of it is be proactive, embed privacy into everything beforehand, and also get rid of zero-sum models of either or, win-lose. That's the traditional model when people think of privacy versus security or privacy versus data utility. I hate the versus. And I can tell you, it was never privacy that won over the other measures, but nor should it be. But I sure as heck wasn't going to have it lose out to all these other things. So Privacy by Design is based on what's called positive sum, which means 2 positive gains at the same time. It's a win-win model and is as simple as getting rid of the versus and substitute and. Privacy and security, privacy and data utility, privacy and marketing. You know, the Canadian Marketing Association often invites me to be their keynote at their annual conference. And I always start by saying, I'm sure I'm the least popular speaker here today. And fortunately, they laugh and they say, no, but we know we have to hear what you have to say. Because you can have privacy and marketing, but you have to give people a choice. They have to be able to decide they want this. So zero-sum models out, positive sum in, and privacy and always proactively embedded. We've had a lot of success with these 7 foundational principles, and they've been implemented all around the world. Privacy by Design has the 7 principles have been translated into 40 languages, literally globally, followed all around the world.
Okay, Dr. Cavoukian, I'm going to put you on the spot then. So you've made it pretty clear that you're not for universal vaccine passports. And can I ask you then, what is the motivation then by the government, if it is in fact them that's spearheading this, for these universal tracking devices of the entire populace?
I could be unkind, so let me try to be very diplomatic. The governments are building upon all of the massive fear in the populations all around the world. People are so scared. And when you build on fear, you get compliance. The governments are saying to everybody, look, you have to get a vaccine passport. You have to get a vaccine. You need a vaccine passport to document it. If not, people are going to spread this disease. COVID-19 is going to proliferate, etc. So they're building on the dreadful fear that has been mounting. And I understand people are scared. And so they're saying, well, if I have to get one of these, I'll do it. I don't want a vaccine passport, but if I have to, I will. And that's what governments and central authorities are doing. And I think it's reprehensible. I think to build on people's fear and just compound that, I think is most unfortunate.
Yes. And, we could even get into a discussion of how this fear is generated and how accurate the information is that is being propagated by the media and by government and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll try to avoid that for now. I wanted to ask you also about other countries and their implementation of certain technologies. So if we look at Australia, something that's a little more similar to us, and the idea of this QR code. So can you explain, first of all, the QR code to us? And I think most people know what it is, but I would like to hear from you, please, Doctor.
It's a code that can be retained electronically and from people's devices, and central authorities can collect this and then easily track you and trace you over various activities, and there's no going back when you have this.
So I'm vindicated in going to a restaurant and not wanting to scan a QR code for the menu?
Yes, do not do it. Why do they need your QR code? I mean, why do they need anything? You're giving them your business, for God's sakes. This is what drives me crazy, is privacy is all about control, personal control over the use and disclosure of your personal information. You don't want to give out your information. If it's not necessary, don't do it. There are times when it's necessary, but most of the time it's not necessary. And these are the things that concern me. In Australia, other countries are hopefully not going in that direction in terms of creating crypto backdoors. Let me explain that.
Please.
End-to-end encryption is amazing. Apple, for example, offers end-to-end encryption. And what it does is allows you to communicate freely with whoever, and only the two of you, or how many there are, will gain access to that communication because you have the codes to gain access to it. A crypto backdoor would be able to break into that communication, that encryption. And that's why it's called a crypto backdoor. Cryptography is encryption. And it will enable law enforcement, for example, to gain access to your communications. The thing is, we in my view, we don't want crypto backdoors. This was discussed 2001. I'll never forget. I was commissioner, and it went around the world globally. We talked about the creation of backdoors for just over a year. And at the end, everyone agreed this is a terrible idea. Because you see, it's not just what you might consider the good guys who will be able to gain access to your communications. The minute you have another mode of gaining access to communications, the bad guys are also going to get into that. 15 of the world's leading cryptographers in 2015 wrote a paper called Keys Under Doormats. They used a title like that because they wanted the average layperson to understand, just as you might leave a key under the doormat so your child could gain entry into your home if they lost their key, it will also enable the bad guys, the thieves, to gain entry into your home. So the minute you create a back door, all the other bad guys are going to get it, not just law enforcement, et cetera. So it's a terrible idea. It's being fought all around the world. but Australia has gone in that direction. So this is the problem. We have to continue to fight this. And now crypto backdoors every couple of years are coming up again saying, we need to do this. And then the cryptographers say, no, you don't. It's a terrible idea. And we're going to go back and forth.
So the idea of keeping track of everyone's movements, not just their medical information, but tracking them in real time and recording everything about them, then could lead to, this kind of Orwellian society. And I did want to bring up China because they have this. So please, yes, the social credit system. Could you please speak to this, Dr. Cavoukian?
This makes me crazy. Truly, it makes my blood boil. Talk about the lack of freedom. But it's the exact opposite. It's like you've got the police everywhere. China has created these social credit scores. Everyone has a social credit score. And they have the weakest things associated with them. If you jaywalk too much, your score goes down. The government decides what's good and bad, and you get scored on that. And this can affect you enormously. I'll give you an example. This brilliant child finished high school, and he was all A pluses the whole way. And he wanted to apply to, he applied to universities in China. He's brilliant. He didn't get accepted into any university. Why? Because the social credit scores of his parents were considered to be unacceptable. Can you imagine you're punishing the child, this brilliant child, because of what you think, the bad behavior of the parents? I mean, it's appalling. And this is what makes me just gag when I think of those kind of measures that governments could take. No freedom, zero.
So, just to be devil's advocate, people here could say, well, we don't live in communist China. We don't have a communist government. We've got a democratic government. How could that possibly happen here? How could that be unfair? Could you address that, please?
Well, things can happen all the time. I think we all value freedom of speech, for example.
We do.
Is in favor of it. What has the government done? Trudeau government, Bill C-10, now Bill C-36. They curtail your freedom of speech online. So somehow the government is going to decide what's acceptable and not. They want to keep out bad speech. It's ridiculous. Who's going to determine what's good and what's bad? And if you have truly bad speech that gets online, a number of people jump on it anyway and criticize it. It is absurd to think that somehow the government is going to decide what is acceptable in terms of speech. These are the things, the encroachments into our freedom that I fear.
So you believe then there is a real danger with Bill C-10 and C-36 because, I spoke to a former head of news for CBC about C-10 and, his answer was rather long. And when I finally just said, does it have the potential to curtail free speech? He said, yes. And I said, okay, thank you. There we go. So the way the bill is currently worded, the way they're worded, it kind of leaves that open. Am I correct? So
wide open. There used to be section 14.1, which they removed from C-10, which preserved people's ability to speak freely and communicate freely. It's gone. So we're in the hands of the government now to decide what's acceptable and what's not. I mean, this makes me crazy because so many of the things I say may be considered unacceptable. I oppose vaccine passports. The government's not going to like that.
No, and there's others who won't like that as well. Okay, so can we talk a little bit more about the technology? I know we spoke briefly about it. So you look at these QR codes, which are these little readable optical patches that look like, the game Go, right? The little black and white squares and all this. I think that's what it was designed on. And you're able to read information horizontally and vertically, and it can be used to track. It can be used to give you information. It can be used to like spatially and temporally track. What type of technology would be used in the implementation of vaccine passports, and what kind of centralized processing would be used there, like an artificial intelligence? Or
it could be that. It could be as simple as this individual with the QR code linked to a particular geolocation, so they would know ultimately if these are widely collected at a variety of stores and restaurants and games, football games, baseball games, travel, your presence at a particular site could be tracked easily. Oh, she was here at 3:00 and then she went there at 5:00. She met with so-and-so whose QR code would be matched to mine. They could track your coming and going. That's why they're saying it's going to create this inescapable web of geolocation tracking, a global digital infrastructure that will lead to what they're calling vaccine surveillance. I know some people might think I'm crazy. It's like too far way out there. But who thought freedom of speech would have been curtailed?
Well, I don't see how, because we were already there with these. And so just carrying your cell phone on you makes you trackable. We know that. I mean, the average children know this. And so the next step would be to implement something that would be much more personal and something that you couldn't necessarily get rid of. And if there is in fact some kind of technology inherent or built into the vaccines that is injectable, and we don't know yet for sure, so we won't speak to that. But if there is, then you've got a permanent tracker, not just the information that follows you around, but this is localized to you in time and space. So,
absolutely. That's why some people are saying is creating a national caste system that will become like a spying apparatus. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that's the direction we're headed in.
And I wanted to say, who's responsible and why, and what can lead from this, Dr. Cavoukian? Why implement this?
And that's such a good question, because you see, pandemics come and go. People are going to say, well, it's a pandemic, we're scared. In emergency situations, often privacy protective measures are suspended. But theoretically, they're only supposed to be suspended during the emergency, during the pandemic or the terrorist incident. But they're not. That's what we know. Look at after 9/11, continuing tracking of individuals' activities. Continues to this day. So I am frightened that once the pandemic ends, and it will end, all pandemics end, emergencies end, the tracking will continue. That's what concerns me enormously.
Okay, so what are some of the tracking technologies? So I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna say, people told to stay 2 meters apart from each other. And I was on Google Maps one night, just kind of looking for my address because, I don't sleep well sometimes. And I found my deck, and there was someone sitting on a white chair reading a book on the deck, and it was me. And I was like, okay, not wearing too many clothes, but that's okay. The book blocks everything. My point being is the satellite was actually able to discern me as an individual. Then I decided to check out other locations that were busier, and you could see individual people. So is there any intent here? Was there any intent with lockdowns? This is some wild speculation, perhaps, with the separation, with the reduction in the population outdoors, in order to maybe develop this technology or to implement or to test. I don't know.
Interesting theory. And I don't know either, but certainly those kind of suspicious kind of thoughts are rising.
Yes.
Because there is so much surveillance that is taking place that we would never have thought about in the past. It would have been considered, crazy thinking, and it's taking place. Our freedom of speech is being impacted. Our freedom of movement is being impacted. These are the things that concern me enormously. I value freedom probably more than anyone. And privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. You cannot have free and open societies without a solid foundation of privacy. And I fear that we're just eroding that on a daily basis.
So what if someone says to you, Dr. Cavoukian, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I have nothing to fear from a vaccine passport.
I love that. I have nothing to hide. What's the problem? That could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich in Germany, because that's how it always starts. Well, if you have nothing to fear, what's the problem? The problem is that it's your life. It's not everybody else's life. You shouldn't have to display everything you do to everyone. Surely you have some matters you'd like to keep private. And if you don't, that's fine too. But I know I do. I have a wonderful husband. I have a wonderful home. I love my privacy. And I am as law-abiding a citizen as you can find. But it's not about having something to hide. That's crazy. That's premised on a surveillance state. Do you really want a surveillance state? You want to be like what Germany was back then? And let me clear, Germany is now the leading privacy and data protection country in the world. They lead with that. Ever since that ended, when they got rid of that horrible time in their history, they stepped up and have protected privacy more than anybody else. They are the leading privacy data protection country in the world. I've been to many conferences in Germany where they start with a reference to that time and never again.
Okay. I wanted to go on a little bit with the technology here, but I think what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the Canada-US border. So do you know what the plans are and what has currently been implemented, Dr. Cavoukian?
My understanding is that a vaccine passport is going to be, I don't know if it's required. When you are, let's say you're returning to Canada, you live here and you're returning to Canada, some proof of you being COVID negative is going to be demanded. And it could be a vaccine passport. It could theoretically be a negative COVID test or whatever. But then you're expected to quarantine, self-quarantine for 14 days when you arrive. I have no idea beyond that where this is going to be going. But I just worry so much that it's going to impact our travel with the US, which everyone relies on. We have a wonderful relationship with the US, and we certainly don't want to put up walls to that in terms of tourism and exchange of, business, etc.
And of course, there's this difference because the individual states seem to have a lot more autonomy than we do here within the provinces. Our federal government has all this power, and certainly when you have a minority liberal government and the official opposition conservative government, the conservatives, all like towing the line together. There's no counter narrative. So you don't have Texas, you don't have a DeSantis in Florida, right?
I know. It's I honestly can't predict the direction this is going to take. And there may be a requirement for, I don't know if there's going to be a requirement for people getting biometrics or facial images. Let me tell you one thing about biometrics. I totally oppose surveillance cameras and all of the information, the facial images that are captured. But let me be clear, there are two types of biometrics in terms of facial images, one-to-one and one-to-many. One-to-many is what we oppose, and a number of states in the US are banning outright facial recognition. They're banning it. Why? Because one-to-many meaning my face being compared to millions of other faces to see if I'm a bad guy. 81% of the time, conservatively, you will get an inaccurate match, false positive. In the UK, for example, they have cameras everywhere. They have surveillance cameras, facial recognition. 81% of the time, it's incorrect. It's a false positive. When I was commissioner, and that would mean that people are falsely identified as being the bad guy. Identity theft proliferates. When I was commissioner, a number of victims of identity theft came to me seeking my assistance. And they said, it wasn't me who racked up all those charges or did all those horrible things. And I would tell them, first thing you do is you go to the police and file an occurrence report, something that validates your claim that your identity has been stolen. And then I would work with them to try to restore their identity. It could take years. So one-to-many, terrible in terms of facial recognition, but one-to-one is actually quite accurate. For example, if you go into the States a lot, which I used to do when we could travel, I got a Nexus card. Global, I think it's called Global Entry, Global Passport. And the reason I got a Nexus card is what it does is when I go to the airport, it compares my face live to a photograph of me that I gave to them, saying, that's me, that's Ann Cavoukian. And when I go to the airport, it compares the photograph to my face, just one-to-one, highly accurate. One-to-one is very accurate and no problem. One-to-many is the one we have to be so worried about.
So this is interesting because one is a self-provided single source comparison, and the other is a database of potentially millions of points.
And in fact, a few months ago in Detroit, Michigan, the Detroit police were using facial recognition. They stopped. Why? 96% of the time it was wrong. It was inaccurate. 96%. I mean, it's crazy.
Imagine curtailing someone's liberties based on that technology.
That's right.
That's ridiculous. Okay. I have so many ways I can go with this here. So we're not sure what's going to happen with the Canada-US border, but what I wanted to know is what are the legal implications here? So in terms of the government's ability to implement here in Canada, these vaccine passports, what are the limitations, or are there any limitations?
That's a good question. And I don't know what the limitations are. This will end up in court, no doubt. But at this point, the government can enact this and just say, you have to have a vaccine passport. And people who cannot get a vaccine passport are going to be doomed. They're going to, obviously, they'll get something from their doctor saying that, but it will impact their freedom enormously. And other individuals who just simply don't want to share that information, you're going to have databases everywhere, I'm afraid, with these information. And not just information that you've got a vaccine passport, but linked to where you were at a particular point in time, geolocation, and time, when and where. This can track you enormously.
This is getting dangerously close to the concept in the Minority Report, where they try to predict what you're going to do, see into the future based on, past behavior, or, I mean, this is really, really Orwellian. And the thing I don't understand, Dr. Cavoukian, is, I had two colleagues and acquaintances, one whose wife was stopped at the US-Canada border trying to come into Canada to visit her ailing, very elderly father. She had proof of testing negative twice on PCR and this is the test that they use to count cases. So we're fair to use it against that, right? Yeah. That she was negative, and that she had a letter from a doctor saying she had COVID and that she was now immune to the 1,400 epitopes, right? Because, and this is what we learned in medical school, is natural immunity trumps vaccine immunity. And when the data is showing that fully vaccinated people are getting COVID more often than people who haven't been vaccinated. This is actually quite scary. And yet she was still held with a threat of a $750,000 fine in quarantine. And I'm not sure how long that lasted before it was cleared up, or if it was cleared up. Another acquaintance, a good friend of mine, actually, his mother was dying, and she literally had 3 to 4 days left. Okay. And he was overseas. And he wanted to come and say goodbye to her. And they said, you're still going to have to quarantine. He was in the military, and you're still going to have to quarantine for 14 days. And he decided at the last minute, I'm not going to come. And she died within 24 hours there. So he may or may not have made it, but it was a heartbreaking decision for him to not get on that plane. Yeah, absolutely. It's okay. You're frozen too, but we can keep talking as long as you can hear me. It'll come back.
I can hear you. Okay, perfect.
Okay. So what I don't understand, Dr. Cavoukian, is that what advantage would the vaccine passports have in this situation? If you're already providing information, you're providing evidence, medical information, you're providing it all, and yet they say that, if you have vaccine passports, then there's no more quarantine and there's no more this. What magic is there in something that provides the same information but is now centralized with an AI to track and to correlate and combine all this data together, and other than to have some kind of overarching plan? Do you see what I'm saying?
But that's it. It's the overarching. It's the central authority that somehow wants to dictate how we can behave and act and continue. Because like you just outlined, it makes no sense. Individuals who, especially the one you said had COVID and was now clear, has the strongest immunity imaginable.
Yep.
It's crazy.
And had a doctor's declaration to that effect and everything.
It makes no sense whatsoever.
No, absolutely. And so according to your own foundational principles of your Global Privacy and Security by Design Center, you say be proactive. And so being proactive is not allowing this to happen, right? It's not allowing this, because if that infrastructure is laid, that virtual infrastructure is laid in place, and material infrastructure too, if it's laid in place, then the potential for this kind of Orwellian oversight is there, as well as the implementation of other restrictions and other types of, shall we say, persecutions?
It just makes me gag. We have to fight this, and that's what I'm trying to do. A lot of the media is now getting interested in the other side. So I'm hoping that there'll be more people who oppose this, and we just keep fighting.
So I know you have to go soon, and I'm so grateful that you spent this amount of time with us, Dr. Cavoukian. But I want to ask you, what can the average person do in order to make their opinion known if they're against vaccine passports, in order to prevent the implementation, to help to prevent in a democratic fashion?
Keep your eyes open for anything you read or see on TV or wherever, where people are going in that direction, and support them. I know a number of people have contacted me. They're writing to various politicians, etc., opposing vaccine passports and other measures. So anytime you see something that curtails your freedom, speak out against it. Express your views, and just always stand up for freedom and for privacy.
Dr. Cavoukian, as a former three-time Information and Privacy Commissioner for the province of Ontario, it is so refreshing to hear you speak like this. And you're clearly very passionate. Is there any last message you would like to get out there to our viewers about the possibility of the vaccine passports?
Try to resist fear. I know fear is frightening. It scares us into taking actions we normally wouldn't do. Try to resist that and look at the bigger picture. Freedom is much more important long-term than anything else. So fight any attempts to restrict your freedom, and stand up for freedom and privacy.
I'm fairly active with physicians and researchers being allowed to speak their minds and offer dissent, because this is how truth is, uncovered. This is how progress is made. And I literally read something a physician wrote about freedom of speech has limits, especially when safety is concerned. And I mean, I've heard this refrain over and over again, and it's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, didn't Benjamin Franklin say something about that?
Right, exactly. Exactly. It's crazy. And again, it's not zero sum. It's not either or.
Right.
Saying give up your safety for privacy. You find ways to do both.
And, especially when you're in a position of responsibility or eminence, such as yourself in your field, or physicians or researchers, I think they have an obligation to speak up if they have doubt. Because as I mentioned in another interview, this whole idea of consensus, science is not consensus, right? Consensus is, thalidomide is okay, and 4 out of 5 doctors recommend Camel cigarettes, that's consensus, right? So what about the 5th doctor? What do they get a say? And they should speak up. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on to our show today, Dr. Cavoukian. Are there any resources or links that you would like to share with us? I know your site has a link.
Yeah, that would be great. If you can refer people to my website, that would be great.
Sure. For those people listening, it's GPS by Design Center. That's Center RE. .com. So gpsbydesignCenter.com. And are there any other?
In the US, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, they're amazing.
Okay, wonderful. Well, on behalf of myself, Dr. Sam Dubé, and the Toronto Business Journal, and all of our viewers out there, Dr. Ann Cavoukian, thank you so much for lending your expertise and your passion to us today. It was very enlightening, and we hope to speak with you again in the future.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dubé. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.